You really thought someone like you belonged at the front table? The words cracked across the ballroom sharper than the crystal glasses trembling beneath the chandelier light. For one suspended second, the entire wedding reception seemed to stop breathing. A violinist near the stage lowered her bow mid-note. A waiter froze beside a tower of champagne flutes. Even the soft, golden lights reflecting off the marble floor suddenly felt colder. Naomi Carter stood perfectly still near the edge of the elevated bridal platform, one hand wrapped around a navy blue folder pressed carefully against her ribs. Her black dress, elegant but understated, caught the warm Manhattan light in soft folds of satin. She hadn't spoken more than 3 sentences since arriving at the Hale Grand Hotel 30 minutes earlier, yet somehow every eye in the ballroom had found her. Victoria Hale stepped closer, the train of her designer wedding gown sliding behind her like fresh snow across polished stone. Diamonds glittered at her throat. Her smile did not reach her eyes. Security told me guests were wandering into restricted areas, Victoria said, voice smooth enough to make the humiliation feel intentional. I just didn't realize they meant this. A few nervous laughs fluttered through the crowd. Naomi kept her posture calm. I'm here to speak with Ethan, she replied softly. It'll only take a minute. Victoria's expression tightened at the groom's name. Around them, guests shifted in their seats, pretending not to stare while staring anyway. Naomi noticed the little details the way she always did. The older investor near the bar loosening his tie. The bridesmaid whispering behind a champagne glass. The photographer lowering his camera slightly, sensing tension more valuable than posed smiles. Beyond the ballroom windows, rain streaked down the glass overlooking Midtown Manhattan, turning the city lights into blurred rivers of gold and white. You people always say that, Victoria replied quietly, though the microphone clipped to her dress carried every syllable through the room's speakers. 1 minute. 1 favor. 1 conversation. Naomi felt several heads turn harder at the phrase you people, but no one interrupted. Not the executives seated near the dance floor. Not the socialites smiling behind manicured fingers. Not even Ethan Hale himself, standing 20 feet away speaking to 2 board members while completely unaware the room had shifted around him. Naomi adjusted her grip on the folder. Inside were documents worth more than the entire floral arrangement hanging above the ballroom ceiling. Contracts. Emergency capital authorization forms. Signatures that could stop Hale Technologies from collapsing before Monday morning's market open. She had flown in from Chicago that afternoon because Ethan deserved the truth before it was too late. Or at least she had believed he did. Victoria's gaze dropped to Naomi's dress, then slowly traveled back up again. I don't know which staff member forgot to check invitations at the entrance, she said, but this isn't some charity banquet. The sting of the sentence settled over the room heavier than the music still floating awkwardly from the orchestra. Naomi could feel the eyes on her skin now. Measuring, judging, deciding who belonged. She had spent most of her life recognizing that look before people even opened their mouths. The billionaire founder hidden behind simple dresses. The black woman mistaken for help before humanity. The investor no one imagined owned more shares than the men laughing beside the bar. Still, her voice stayed even. I'm not here to cause a problem. Funny, Victoria said. Because that's exactly what you look like. Then it happened. Victoria's hand reached forward suddenly, fingers catching the delicate fabric near Naomi's shoulder. The sound was small at first. A sharp rip of satin beneath chandelier light. But in the silence of the ballroom, it sounded enormous. The sound of torn satin lingered in the ballroom long after Victoria released the fabric. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly toward the thin split near her shoulder, fingertips brushing the damaged seam with almost mechanical calm. No anger crossed her face. No embarrassment either. Somehow that made the silence worse. The orchestra had stopped completely now. A glass clinked somewhere near the back bar before immediately going quiet again. Ethan Hale finally turned. What is going on? He asked, his voice carrying across the ballroom as he stepped away from the investors he had been speaking with moments earlier. His tuxedo jacket hung open slightly at the collar, the strain beneath his polished appearance harder to hide up close. Naomi noticed the exhaustion in his eyes instantly. 3 years ago, when they first met in a conference room in Chicago, Ethan still looked like a man who slept. Now he looked like someone surviving on ambition and caffeine alone. Victoria crossed her arms before he even reached them. "Apparently your wedding has open seating now," she said lightly, though tension sharpened every word. She wandered into the family section. Ethan's gaze landed on Naomi at last. For a brief second, confusion flickered across his face, followed by recognition so small most people would have missed it. But Naomi saw it. Ethan took half a step forward. "Naomi?" he said quietly. The crowd reacted instantly. Some guests exchanged glances. Others leaned closer toward each other. Victoria blinked once. "Wait," she said slowly. "You know her?" Naomi straightened the folder against her side before answering. "I told you I only needed a minute." Ethan's eyes dropped toward the torn shoulder of her dress. His jaw tightened almost invisibly. "What happened?" Before Naomi could answer, Victoria let out a short laugh that sounded too brittle to be natural. "Oh please, Ethan. She shows up uninvited in black at our wedding and starts hovering around the stage. What exactly was I supposed to think?" Naomi could feel the room shifting now. Earlier the stares had carried amusement. Now they carried curiosity. That was always the moment people became dangerous. Not when they mocked you. When they realized there might be more to you than they assumed. Ethan rubbed a hand slowly across his mouth. "Victoria," he said carefully. "This is Naomi Carter." "Okay," Victoria replied. "Should that mean something to me?" Naomi noticed one of the older men near the dance floor suddenly sit straighter in his chair. Another guest lowered his champagne glass halfway. A woman from the finance pages Ethan had once introduced at a gala went visibly pale. Tiny reactions. Quiet reactions. But reactions all the same. Outside, rain tapped softly against the ballroom windows, streaking silver beneath the Manhattan skyline. Naomi suddenly remembered another rainy night 2 years earlier, Ethan sitting across from her in a dim Chicago steakhouse with spreadsheets spread across the table between untouched coffee cups. Back then Hale Technologies had been 72 hours away from missing payroll. Ethan had tried to hide the panic in his voice while insisting his company only needed time. Most investors walked away after seeing the numbers. Naomi had stayed. Not because the company was stable. It was not. Not because Ethan was powerful. He was not yet. She stayed because, unlike most men in business, Ethan still spoke about employees before profits. That mattered to her more than projections ever did. "I came because the documents could not wait until Monday," Naomi said softly. Ethan's expression shifted immediately. "You brought them here?" She nodded once. Victoria looked between them both now, irritation slowly giving way to confusion. "What documents?" Naomi loosened her grip slightly on the navy folder. A silver embossed logo caught the chandelier light for the first time that evening. 2 letters. NC. The same initials printed across half the financial journals on Wall Street that month. Across the ballroom, someone inhaled sharply. The initials on the folder seemed to pull the oxygen out of the room. NC Capital. Even guests who barely followed the markets recognized the name. The fund had quietly rescued 3 major tech firms in less than 18 months and had become famous on Wall Street for operating almost like a ghost. No interviews. No magazine covers. No public appearances. Just billion-dollar decisions made behind closed doors. Victoria looked around the ballroom as whispers started moving between tables like wine through dry leaves. "What is happening?" she asked, her voice lower now, less certain. Ethan stared at the silver logo as if he had forgotten where he was standing. "Naomi," he said carefully, "you should have called me." "I tried," she answered softly. "Your office said you were unavailable all week." Ethan's face darkened slightly at that. Near the dance floor, one of the board members from Hale Technologies quietly stepped away from his wife and moved closer. Naomi recognized him immediately. Leonard Grayson, Chief Financial Officer. The man who had spent the last 4 months trying to convince Ethan to sell majority control before the company collapsed completely. Leonard stopped several feet away, eyes fixed on the folder in Naomi's hand. "Miss Carter," he said cautiously, "I did not realize you were attending tonight." Victoria turned toward him immediately. "Wait. You know her too?" Leonard hesitated just long enough to answer the question without speaking. Naomi could almost see the calculations happening behind Victoria's eyes now. The room no longer viewed her as an intruder. Worse, they were beginning to view her as someone important. And people who build their lives around status fear that shift more than embarrassment itself. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Can we move this somewhere private?" Naomi glanced around the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead like frozen fire. Servers stood motionless beside silver trays. Guests pretended to sip champagne while openly listening. At the center of it all stood Victoria in her white couture gown, looking less like a bride now and more like someone slowly losing control of a story she thought she understood. "No," Victoria said suddenly before Naomi could answer. "No, I would actually like someone to explain why half the room looks terrified of a woman carrying paperwork." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. That tiny movement alone told Naomi more than any balance sheet had. He was exhausted. Cornered. Drowning deeper than even the market reports showed. She remembered the numbers from 48 hours earlier. Cash reserves nearly depleted. Emergency credit lines frozen. A hostile acquisition offer waiting for one final weak quarter to strike. Hale Technologies was balancing over open air. And almost nobody in this ballroom knew it. "Victoria," Ethan said quietly, "NC Capital has been funding us." Her brow furrowed. "Okay. So?" Leonard Grayson swallowed hard beside them. "Not funding," he corrected softly. "Saving." The word landed heavily. Naomi watched several executives immediately avoid eye contact with her. Funny how quickly arrogance turns into caution once money enters the conversation. Victoria laughed once, but there was no confidence left in it now. "You are seriously telling me this woman is connected to NC Capital?" No one answered immediately. Ethan finally stepped closer to Naomi. "She is NC Capital." Silence. Complete silence. Even the rain against the ballroom windows seemed quieter somehow. Victoria blinked once, twice, as though her mind physically refused to process what she had heard. Her gaze moved slowly across Naomi again. The simple black dress. The understated earrings. The calm posture. The torn fabric near her shoulder. Naomi had seen that look before too. The moment prejudice collides with reality and neither one knows where to stand anymore. "That is not possible," Victoria whispered. Naomi met her eyes gently. "Most people say that before they learn my name." Leonard cleared his throat nervously. "Miss Carter owns 51% of the emergency shares protecting Hale Technologies from acquisition." Around them, whispers exploded softly through the ballroom. Someone near the bar nearly dropped a champagne glass. A reporter from Forbes lowered his phone halfway, stunned. Ethan looked at Naomi with something heavier than gratitude now. Shame. Because for the first time that night, he truly saw the tear running through the shoulder of her dress. No one moved for several long seconds after Leonard finished speaking. The ballroom had transformed completely. Earlier, the room carried the loose confidence of old money and expensive champagne. Now it felt fragile. Careful. Like everyone suddenly understood they were standing too close to something powerful they had failed to recognize. Victoria stared at Naomi as though seeing her for the first time had physically unsettled her. 51%? She repeated quietly. Leonard nodded once. Without Miss Carter's emergency shares, Hale Technologies would have lost voting. Protection months ago. Ethan loosened his bow tie slightly, the pressure in the room visibly tightening around him. Naomi noticed the faint exhaustion under his eyes again. She had seen founders break before. Seen brilliant people crushed beneath debt, expectations, and public image. But Ethan's downfall had always frightened her more because part of him still cared too much. Men like that rarely survived Wall Street untouched. Victoria folded her arms tighter. Why would you hide this? She asked Naomi. Why come here looking like? She stopped herself before finishing the sentence, but everyone heard it anyway. Looking poor. Looking unimportant. Looking dismissible. Naomi answered gently. Because I was invited to celebrate a wedding, not announce my net worth. A few guests lowered their eyes immediately. Somewhere near the orchestra platform, a woman quietly set her champagne glass down untouched. The embarrassment spreading through the room no longer belonged only to Victoria. It belonged to everyone who had watched without speaking. Ethan finally stepped closer until he stood directly across from Naomi beneath the chandelier light. You should not have come here alone, he said softly. Naomi gave the smallest shake of her head. You stopped answering my calls. Ethan's expression tightened. Things have been complicated. I know, Naomi replied. That is why I came. Her fingers brushed the navy folder again. The edges had softened slightly from how tightly she had been holding it all evening. Inside were the final signatures needed to stop Blackridge Ventures from forcing control away from Ethan's company by the end of the quarter. Naomi had spent 48 straight hours negotiating those protections while most of Manhattan prepared for this wedding. She had not come to embarrass anyone. She came because Monday morning could destroy everything Ethan had built. Victoria looked between them both now, confusion slowly turning into something more personal. How long have you known each other? She asked. Ethan hesitated. Naomi answered first. 3 years. Victoria's face hardened slightly at that. 3 years and somehow I have never heard your name? Naomi noticed the implication immediately. Ethan did too. Victoria, he warned quietly. But the bride's composure was beginning to crack beneath the weight of public humiliation. No, I would actually love to understand this. She continued, voice thinner now. You trust her with your company, your finances, apparently your entire future, but somehow your fiancé never met her? The ballroom remained painfully silent. Rain continued sliding down the tall glass windows overlooking the city, silver against black night. Ethan rubbed a hand across his forehead slowly before answering. Because Naomi never wanted attention. Naomi looked down briefly at the torn seam near her shoulder. Funny. Attention had found her anyway. Leonard Grayson cleared his throat carefully. Miss Carter has personally prevented 3 acquisition attempts against Hale Technologies. Victoria stared at him. Personally? Including the one last November. Leonard added. The board believed we were finished. Naomi remembered that week clearly. Ethan sleeping in his office. Employees terrified layoffs were coming before Christmas. Financial blogs predicting collapse almost hourly. She had wired $180 million overnight before the market opened because she believed some companies deserved the chance to survive. Not because they were profitable. Because sometimes people were worth saving before the world noticed their value. Ethan's voice lowered. Naomi protected this company when nobody else would. Victoria looked at Naomi again, but the anger in her eyes had started mixing with something more dangerous now. Shame. And I tore your dress in front of 400 people. She whispered. Naomi finally met her gaze fully. Her voice remained calm enough to make the words hurt even more. No, she said softly. You revealed what this room believed about me before anyone knew who I was. The words settled over the ballroom like falling ash. Nobody reached for their drinks anymore. Nobody pretended this was still a celebration. Victoria stood motionless beneath the crystal chandeliers, one hand tightening slowly around the fabric of her wedding gown while cameras from invited society photographers remained awkwardly lowered at their sides. Naomi could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing toward her now, but she had learned long ago that silence could protect dignity better than anger ever could. Ethan looked like a man trying to hold together a collapsing bridge with his bare hands. Naomi, he said quietly, please let me explain. She gave him a tired smile that barely touched her eyes. Explain what? She asked gently. That your company is 2 weeks away from losing operational control? Or that your fiancé did not recognize the woman keeping it alive? Ethan flinched, almost invisibly. Around them, several executives exchanged uneasy glances. Leonard Grayson adjusted his cufflinks nervously before stepping closer. Miss Carter, he said carefully, perhaps this conversation should happen privately. Naomi looked toward the ballroom windows instead. Rain continued tracing silver lines down the glass high above Park Avenue. The city outside looked blurred and distant now, like another world entirely. No, she replied softly. I think everyone here already decided who I was the moment I walked in. Victoria swallowed hard. I said I was sorry. Naomi turned toward her calmly. You are sorry now, she answered. But you were comfortable humiliating me 5 minutes ago. The honesty in her voice cut through the room cleaner than shouting ever could. Victoria's face lost color. Ethan stepped forward again. She did not know who you were. Naomi's eyes shifted toward him. Exactly. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. A server quietly backed away from the center tables carrying untouched champagne flutes. Near the orchestra platform, one of the violinists slowly lowered her instrument onto her lap, watching the scene unfold with wide, uncertain eyes. Naomi finally opened the navy folder in her hands. The soft sound of paper sliding against paper echoed strangely loud in the stillness. She removed a stack of documents bound with silver clips and handed them toward Ethan. These are the finalized protections against Blackridge Ventures, she said. If signed before market open Monday, they prevent the acquisition vote. Ethan accepted the papers carefully, almost reverently. Naomi noticed his hands trembling slightly now. You still did this? He asked quietly. After tonight? Naomi looked at him for a long moment before answering. I invested in your company because I believed in the people working there, she said. Thousands of employees should not lose their future because the people at the top forgot how to see others clearly. Several guests visibly looked away after hearing that. Leonard exhaled heavily under his breath. Victoria stared at the documents in Ethan's hands as if they physically hurt to look at. How much? She whispered suddenly. Naomi frowned slightly. What? How much are these worth? Victoria asked again, voice fragile now. Ethan closed the folder slowly. Enough to save the company. The answer seemed to hollow the room even further. Naomi could almost feel the shift happening around her. Earlier she had been invisible. Then she became important. Now she had become something worse in rooms like this. A mirror. One of the older investors near the dance floor quietly stood and approached Naomi with careful respect. Miss Carter, he said softly, I owe you an apology as well. Others began rising slowly afterward. Tiny movements. Quiet acknowledgments. A woman who had laughed earlier now could not even meet Naomi's eyes. Another guest muttered something ashamed beneath his breath. Victoria watched it happen in real time. The entire ballroom changing direction around a woman she had dismissed because of how she looked standing alone near the stage. Her voice cracked softly. I thought you were trying to take something from us. Naomi held her gaze gently. No, she replied. I came here trying to protect what was already falling apart. Ethan lowered his head briefly, shame written across every exhausted line of his face. Then Naomi reached toward the torn shoulder of her dress, smoothing the damaged fabric flat with quiet dignity before speaking one final time. Money can repair companies, she said softly. But not every room survives the truth once it enters. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The ballroom remained frozen beneath the glow of crystal. Chandeliers and soft amber wall lights, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Earlier the room felt loud with status and performance. Now it felt exposed. Honest in the worst possible way. Naomi stood near the edge of the dance floor with one hand resting lightly against the torn seam of her dress while rain continued tapping against the tall windows overlooking Manhattan. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly above the city skyline. Ethan still held the folder against his chest like it weighed more than paper should. The orchestra remained silent. Even the photographers had lowered their cameras completely now, uncertain whether capturing another image would feel like journalism or guilt. Victoria slowly stepped backward until the edge of the bridal table touched the back of her hand. Her eyes had become glassy beneath the expensive makeup carefully applied only hours earlier. Naomi noticed how young she suddenly looked. Not cruel. Just small. Smaller than the room she had tried so hard to control. Leonard Grayson quietly guided several executives away toward the far side of the ballroom, giving the center of the room space to breathe again. Guests spoke only in whispers now. Tiny cautious murmurs floating beneath the soft hum of air conditioning and distant rain. Naomi exhaled slowly. Her shoulders ached from the flight from Chicago, the tension of the evening, and the strange heaviness that always followed disappointment. Not financial disappointment. Human disappointment. That kind stayed longer. Ethan finally stepped closer again, slower this time, like he understood force no longer belonged anywhere near this moment. "I should have protected you from this," he said quietly. Naomi looked at him for several seconds before answering. "No," she replied gently. "You should have created a room where this could not happen in the first place." Ethan lowered his eyes immediately. The truth in her words settled heavily between them. Near the ballroom windows, a hotel employee quietly adjusted one of the curtains that had shifted open slightly from the storm outside. Cold blue reflections from the city spilled briefly across the marble floor before disappearing again behind thick velvet fabric. Naomi suddenly remembered her mother ironing uniforms late at night in a small apartment in Baltimore, while old jazz records played softly through scratched speakers. Her mother used to say something every Sunday before church. "People show you who they are fastest when they believe you have nothing to offer them." At the time, Naomi had not fully understood it. Tonight she did. Victoria finally spoke again, but the sharpness in her voice was gone completely now. "I spent this entire night worried about appearances," she whispered. "And somehow I became the ugliest person in the room." Naomi's expression softened slightly. Not with forgiveness yet. Just recognition. Shame was finally speaking honestly. The bride looked down at her own hands trembling faintly against white silk fabric. "I saw your dress," Victoria continued quietly. "I saw your skin. I saw you standing alone. And I decided who you were before you even spoke." No one interrupted her. Not Ethan. Not the guests listening nearby. Naomi glanced toward the rain outside again. Water streaked down the glass and silver rivers beneath the city lights, blurring New York into something softer than it really was. "Most people do," Naomi answered calmly. Ethan looked at the torn fabric near Naomi's shoulder one more time before carefully removing his tuxedo jacket. He held it toward her without speaking. Naomi hesitated briefly, then accepted it quietly. The fabric still carried faint warmth from his shoulders. A simple human gesture. Nothing more. Nothing less. Across the ballroom, several guests slowly began sitting down again, but nobody returned to eating or dancing. The wedding had become something else now. Not a celebration. A reckoning. Naomi slipped the jacket gently over her shoulders, covering the torn seam at last. Then she looked once around the room full of million-dollar jewelry, polished marble, designer gowns, and carefully rehearsed smiles. None of it looked impressive anymore. Just fragile. Fragile things pretending to be permanent. The storm outside had grown heavier by the time the ballroom doors quietly opened again. A cold draft slipped across the marble floor, stirring the candle flames arranged along the reception tables. Naomi stood near the windows wrapped in Ethan's tuxedo jacket while conversations resumed only in fragments around the room. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody raised a glass. The entire reception now felt like a ceremony for something other than marriage. Leonard Grayson returned from the far side of the ballroom holding a tablet in one hand, his expression pale beneath the warm chandelier light. "Ethan," he said carefully, "you need to see this immediately." Ethan turned toward him, exhaustion still visible across every line of his face. Leonard handed him the tablet without another word. Naomi watched Ethan's eyes scan the screen once, then again slower. The color drained from his face almost instantly. "What is it?" Victoria asked softly. Ethan looked up slowly. Blackridge just moved the acquisition vote forward. A murmur spread through the nearby executives. Leonard nodded grimly. Monday morning became tomorrow at 9 a.m. They leaked rumors about insolvency 30 minutes ago. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Of course they did. Blackridge Ventures had always operated like sharks smelling blood beneath water. Ruthless. Efficient. Patient until the exact right moment. Ethan ran a hand through his hair and looked toward Naomi. Can the protections still hold? Before she answered, Leonard spoke first. Only if Miss Carter signs tonight. Silence returned instantly. Victoria stared at Naomi with widening eyes. Tonight? Leonard nodded. The emergency controlling shares need final authorization before midnight Eastern Time, or the injunction becomes invalid. Ethan lowered the tablets slowly. You knew this could happen. Naomi met his gaze calmly. That is why I came in person. Outside the windows, lightning flickered faintly across the Manhattan skyline, illuminating the rain in brief silver flashes. Several guests near the back tables quietly excused themselves, sensing they were no longer attending a wedding but witnessing the survival of a company unfolding in real time. Ethan looked down at the documents still secured inside the folder. Naomi, he said carefully after. What happened tonight, I would understand if you walked away. She studied him for a moment. Not the CEO. Not the headlines. Just a tired man standing in front of her looking like the weight of thousands of employees had settled directly onto his shoulders. Do you know why I invested in Hale Technologies? She asked softly. Ethan shook his head once. Naomi glanced briefly around the ballroom before answering. 3 years ago, your company lost power during a winter storm in Cleveland. Most executives evacuated the building immediately. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly as the memory returned. You stayed. Naomi continued. Your employees were trapped inside because the elevators shut down. One of the cleaning staff was 6 months pregnant. You carried bottled water up 14 flights of stairs yourself because emergency crews had not arrived yet. Ethan stared at her in stunned silence. You remember that? Naomi gave a faint smile. Investors notice character long before they notice profits. Victoria lowered her eyes slowly. The room had gone completely still again. Even Leonard looked shaken now. Naomi stepped toward Ethan carefully and placed the folder back into his hands. Blackridge sees numbers, she said quietly. I saw a man trying not to become cruel while building something difficult. That matters more. Ethan swallowed hard, emotion tightening visibly in his throat. For the first time all evening, Naomi saw something crack beneath the polished surface he wore for the world. Not pride. Not fear. Gratitude. Real gratitude. Victoria suddenly stepped forward, her voice trembling softly. Why are you still helping us? Naomi looked at her gently beneath the chandelier light. Because dignity should not disappear just because someone else failed to show it. Tears gathered in Victoria's eyes immediately after hearing that. Around them, the ballroom remained silent except for distant thunder rolling above the city. And in that silence, everyone finally understood something no amount of money in that room could buy. Grace. Victoria stood motionless beneath the chandelier light, tears slipping carefully through the makeup that had taken hours to perfect. Earlier that afternoon, the ballroom around her had become unbearably quiet now, the kind of silence that forces people to hear themselves clearly for the first time. Naomi remained calm near the windows overlooking Manhattan, Ethan's tuxedo jacket resting gently over her shoulders while rain continued tracing silver paths down the glass behind her. Ethan still held the folder tightly against his chest like it contained more than legal documents. In many ways it did. It contained survival. Leonard Grayson checked his watch nervously before speaking again. If the signatures are filed before midnight, he said carefully, Blackridge loses its leverage entirely. Ethan nodded slowly without taking his eyes off Naomi. Then we finalize it tonight. Several board members immediately began moving toward a smaller conference area beside the ballroom, their polished shoes clicking softly against marble floors. Expensive watches flashed beneath chandelier light. Phones appeared. Quiet, urgent conversations resumed in controlled whispers. But Naomi noticed something strange now. Every person who passed her stopped first. Some offered respectful nods. Others apologized quietly under their breath. Tiny acts of humility replacing the arrogance that filled the room an hour earlier. Victoria watched all of it happen with trembling hands. "I spent years trying to fit into rooms like this," she said softly, almost to herself. "And somehow you walked into one without needing anybody's approval." Naomi looked at her gently. "Approval is fragile," she replied. "Character lasts longer." Victoria lowered her eyes immediately. The words did not sound cruel. That made them harder to escape. Ethan stepped closer to Naomi again once the others moved away. The exhaustion in his face looked different now. Less like defeat. More like honesty finally catching up with him. "I should have introduced you properly years ago," he admitted quietly. Naomi gave a faint smile. "I never asked for introductions." "No," Ethan said. "But you deserved respect before anyone knew your balance sheet." Naomi studied him for a moment beneath the soft amber light. There it was again. The reason she had trusted him in the first place. Not perfection. Awareness. The ability to recognize failure without hiding behind pride. Across the ballroom, workers quietly began removing untouched dinner plates while the orchestra packed away instruments one by one. The wedding reception had dissolved into something quieter and far more human than celebration. Victoria slowly approached Naomi until only a few feet separated them. Her voice shook slightly. "I do not expect forgiveness tonight," she said. "Honestly, I do not think I deserve it." Naomi remained silent, letting the woman finish. Victoria glanced briefly toward the torn shoulder hidden beneath Ethan's jacket. "But I am sorry," she whispered. "Not because you are wealthy. Not because everybody here suddenly respects you. I am sorry because I reduced you to an assumption before I ever treated you like a person." Naomi could see how difficult the words were for her to say. Real apologies usually are. The ballroom lights reflected softly against the rain-streaked windows behind them, turning the city into blurred gold and silver. Naomi finally answered in the same calm voice she had carried all evening. "The dangerous thing about prejudice," she said gently, "is that people rarely notice it while it still feels normal." Victoria's eyes filled again. Ethan looked away briefly, shame crossing his face once more. Naomi stepped closer and lightly touched Victoria's trembling hand for only a second. Not dramatic. Not performative. Just human. "Learn from tonight," Naomi said softly. "That matters more than punishment." Victoria nodded immediately, tears slipping down her cheeks as she covered her mouth with one shaking hand. Across the ballroom, Leonard signaled quietly that the legal team was ready. Midnight was approaching quickly. Ethan looked toward Naomi one more time before speaking. "After everything that happened here," he asked carefully, "why are you still willing to stand beside this company?" Naomi glanced toward the storm outside. Lightning flickered faintly across the skyline beyond the glass. "Because good people still work there," she answered. "And they deserve a future untouched by the worst moment in this room." Ethan closed his eyes briefly after hearing that. Around them, the final candles along the reception tables burned lower, softer now, as if even the ballroom itself had finally stopped pretending. Midnight arrived quietly over Manhattan. The storm outside had begun to weaken, rain softening into thin silver streams sliding down the ballroom windows while the city lights below shimmered through the glass like scattered gold beneath water. The wedding reception no longer resembled the glamorous celebration printed across society magazines earlier that week. Half the candles had burned low. The orchestra had packed away their instruments hours ago. Flower arrangements still covered the tables, beautiful and expensive, yet strangely hollow now in the heavy silence left behind. In the private conference room beside the ballroom, attorneys finalized signatures beneath bright recessed lighting while phones buzzed softly with updates from Tokyo, London, and Silicon Valley. Hailed technologies would survive the night. Blackridge Ventures had officially lost control less than 12 minutes before midnight. Leonard Grayson stepped out first, loosening his tie with visible relief before quietly informing the remaining executives that the emergency injunction had cleared federal filing. A wave of exhausted breathing moved through the room like people finally remembering oxygen existed. Ethan emerged moments later carrying the Navy folder beneath one arm. He looked different now. Not victorious. Just humbled. The kind of humility that cannot be purchased, inherited, or rehearsed. Naomi stood alone near the ballroom entrance, gazing out toward Park Avenue where headlights reflected across rain-dark pavement. Ethan approached slowly until he stood beside her beneath the soft amber glow of the hallway lights. For several seconds neither spoke. The city hummed faintly below them. Sirens in the distance. Tires hissing across wet streets. Somewhere far beneath the clouds, New York continued moving forward like it always did. "The company is safe," Ethan said quietly at last. Naomi nodded once without turning from the window. "Good." Ethan looked down briefly at the tuxedo jacket, still resting over her shoulders. "You saved more than the company tonight." Naomi finally glanced toward him. "Do not mistake survival for transformation," she said gently. Ethan accepted the truth in silence. Behind them, the ballroom staff slowly cleared the final champagne glasses from abandoned tables. Victoria remained near the center of the room speaking quietly with her parents, but her posture had changed completely now. The sharp confidence she wore earlier had dissolved into something more thoughtful, more careful. At one point, she looked toward Naomi from across the ballroom. Their eyes met only briefly before Victoria lowered her gaze respectfully. No hostility remained there anymore. Only understanding arriving too late to prevent damage, but early enough to change something deeper. Ethan leaned lightly against the marble wall beside the window. "You know," he said softly, "for years I thought success meant building rooms powerful people wanted access to." Naomi watched rainwater slide slowly down the glass before answering. "And now?" Ethan exhaled faintly. "Now I think it means building rooms where people are treated with dignity before anyone asks who they are." Naomi looked at him for a long moment after that. Then, slowly, she smiled. Small. Real. The first genuine smile she had allowed herself all evening. "That lesson cost you an expensive wedding reception," she said quietly. Ethan gave a tired laugh beneath his breath. "Worth every penny." A comfortable silence settled between them after that. No dramatic speeches. No grand reconciliation. Just two people standing above a rain-soaked city while the noise of pride finally faded behind them. Naomi carefully slipped off Ethan's tuxedo jacket and handed it back to him. Her torn dress remained visible beneath the soft hallway light, but somehow it no longer looked damaged. It looked honest. Ethan accepted the jacket slowly. "Will I see you again after tonight?" he asked. Naomi glanced toward the elevators at the far end of the corridor where her driver would already be waiting downstairs. "You will see me Monday morning," she replied calmly. "At the board meeting." Ethan smiled despite himself. "Right." Naomi stepped toward the elevator lobby, heels clicking softly against polished marble floors. As the doors opened, cool air drifted through the hallway carrying the faint scent of rain from the city below. She paused only once before stepping inside. Not to look at the ballroom. Not at the chandeliers or the ruined celebration behind her. She looked at Ethan. "The world reveals itself very clearly," she said softly, "when people believe you have nothing to offer them." Then the elevator doors closed gently between them. Ethan remained standing alone beneath the amber lights long after the elevator disappeared, holding his jacket in silence while rain continued falling over Manhattan.